In recent rounds of escalated conflict, a very large proportion of Gaza residents are reported to have had to leave their homes. The controversial question is, why do many Arab countries declare that they will not open permanent resettlement opportunities for Gaza refugees? This is not only a humanitarian issue but also relates to security, domestic politics, social structure, and regional history. According to many observers, it is necessary to look back at the context from the past to the present to fully understand the reasons. In the year 1948, a period commonly referred to by Palestinians as Nakba. According to many historical documents, when the State of Israel was established, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians left, or were forced to leave their residences. This wave of displacement quickly formed large-scale refugee camps in neighboring countries. At that time, many Arab governments saw this as a temporary situation because they believed that Palestinians would soon have the opportunity to return to their homeland. The reality turned out to be very different from the initial prediction. The refugee camps initially seen as a short-term solution did not only last for a few months or a few years, but gradually became long-term living spaces across multiple generations. In some places, the camps developed into solid residential areas with distinct community life. However, the degree of integration of Palestinians into local societies varied significantly. Some countries expanded residence and livelihood opportunities, while many others almost maintained separation, making it difficult for refugee communities to fully integrate. During the existence of the refugee camps, many countries went through periods full of tension. Not only a temporary residence, some camps also became spaces where political activities emerged and at times even involved armed conflicts within the camps or nearby areas. According to some regional analyses, these experiences left a kind of collective political memory, causing Arab governments to always be cautious and carefully consider policies related to Palestinian refugees. And this impact remains present to this day. Jordan was once considered one of the countries with the most open approach toward Palestinians, as they allowed the issuance of documents and residence status with considerable flexibility. However, according to many historical documents by the 1970s, the increasingly strong presence of Palestinian armed forces led to serious conflicts right on Jordanian territory. These incidents not only left major security consequences, but also caused the Jordanian authorities to change their perspective, becoming much more cautious in controlling political and military activities related to the refugee community. Unlike Jordan, Lebanon is characterized by a complex social structure where many religious communities and political forces coexist in a fragile balance. To maintain this stability, the Lebanese authorities applied restrictive policies toward Palestinians. For many decades, they were only allowed to work in certain professions and faced numerous barriers in accessing full civil rights. As a result, the Palestinian community is clearly present in Lebanese society, but the degree of deep integration remains very limited, creating social gaps that persist across multiple generations. Syria once received a significant number of Palestinians and was considered one of the countries with a relatively clear welcoming attitude in the region. However, according to many academic analyses, the level of integration of this community into local social life never reached completeness. Palestinians in Syria were still often viewed as a separate group with certain restrictions on economic opportunities, social rights, and participation in community activities, making it difficult for them to achieve deep integration as a natural part of the local society. In Gulf countries exemplified by Kuwait, there were once fairly large Palestinian communities playing important roles in many economic and service sectors. However, by the early 1990s, when regional geopolitical conditions shifted, the policies of these countries changed almost instantly. The Palestinian community, which had been closely tied to local life, quickly fell into a precarious situation, showing that their stability depended greatly on the political and security context of the region, rather than on sustainable integration mechanisms. From the diverse experiences in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, or the Gulf, one prominent common point can be observed: Arab governments all place the highest priority on maintaining internal stability. Maintaining the religious and ethnic balance, along with strict control over security risks, became a consistent principle in policymaking. Political memories and past incidents have left deep marks, making countries today much more cautious about the possibility of having to receive additional large-scale flows of Palestinian refugees. Thus, we can see that historical memory and past experiences have created the cautious approach of host countries. According to many researchers and regional observers, the refusal of Arab countries to accept Gaza refugees for the long term is not a random decision, but stems from a combination of historical security, social, and diplomatic factors. One of the most important reasons is cross-border security risks. Egypt, which controls the Rafah crossing, the only connection between Gaza and Sinai, has deployed additional troops and armored vehicles since the end of 2023 to reinforce the border. Sinai itself is an area that recorded many extremist activities during the period from 2013 to 2020. So Cairo fears that accepting hundreds of thousands of Gaza residents could create conditions for armed groups to infiltrate. This is considered a preventive measure aimed at preventing the formation of new hotspots. Beyond security issues, countries are also concerned with maintaining internal political and social balance. Jordan currently has more than 2 million Palestinians registered with UNRWA, accounting for nearly 40% of the population, making it one of the countries with the largest Palestinian communities in the world. With such a high proportion, any new influx of immigrants could put heavy pressure on employment infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Lebanon faces a similar situation currently. About 450,000 Palestinians live there, but most are still restricted in citizenship and professions in order to maintain the country's fragile religious and political balance. Historical factors also play an important role. The Black September event in Jordan in 1970, which caused approximately 3,000 to 3,500 deaths, according to many documents, left a bitter lesson about the risk of armed groups originating from refugee camps. In Lebanon, the armed presence of the PLO is considered one of the causes leading to a 15-year civil war, causing more than 100,000 deaths and forcing about one-third of the population to leave their homes. These collective memories have caused many Arab governments to maintain a high level of vigilance to this day. From a diplomatic and strategic perspective, many analysts believe that if Gaza residents leave for the long term, the claim to the right of return could be weakened, reducing the negotiation position of the Palestinian side. Therefore, keeping people in place on the disputed territory is seen as a principled stance. The Palestinian issue must be resolved in Gaza and the West Bank, and the burden cannot be shifted to neighboring countries. Legal and administrative aspects are also obstacles. Not all Arab countries have signed or fully implemented the 1951 Refugee Convention. Even when accepting humanitarian aid, most governments only allow temporary status, avoiding creating a legal basis that could lead to permanent residence rights. Finally, economic cost is a factor that cannot be ignored. According to UNRWA, the budget for Palestinian aid in 2022 was about $1.6 billion, but was often in shortfall. If hundreds of thousands or even millions had to be resettled, the burden on healthcare, education, social welfare, and infrastructure would be very large, especially as many Middle Eastern economies are still under pressure from public debt and unemployment. Currently, the United Nations estimates that nearly 1.9 million Gaza residents, more than 85% of the region's population, have had to leave their homes since the end of 2023. However, both Egypt and Jordan have publicly declared that they will not accept permanent resettlement. This stance reflects both caution regarding security and social issues and the aim of preserving the political position of the Palestinian people in the long-term negotiation process. From the Palestinian perspective, the issue of resettlement is not only about survival or a new place to live, but also carries deep political and symbolic significance. Many fear that leaving Gaza during the conflict could be interpreted as abandoning the homeland, which would weaken the historical claim to the right of return. It is precisely this fear that leads part of the population, even while facing harsh conditions, to refuse permanent departure. Notably, this hesitation coincidentally aligns with the stance of many Arab governments, which also oppose permanent resettlement. However, the motivations of the two sides are very different. Countries worry about security, social, and political impacts, while the Palestinian people are attached to identity, historical memory, and self-determination. As a result, the situation of no long-term relocation continues, reflecting the overlap between state strategic calculations and the communal mindset of refugees. Not only governments, but even the Palestinians themselves have their own reasons to refuse leaving their homeland. The reality of tightly closed borders, while the need to protect civilians grows, has created a difficult paradox. According to many reports from the region and international organizations, humanitarian aid is often prioritized, with the presence of convoys delivering food, medical supplies, and emergency support. However, clear boundaries are still maintained. Countries are willing to accept temporary aid, but firmly limit the possibility of long-term resettlement. Statistics from the United Nations show that most Gaza residents have had to leave their homes, and many essential infrastructures such as hospitals, schools, and water and electricity systems have been severely damaged. However, many specific figures on casualties and property losses are still released without independent verification at the time of publication. This further complicates the humanitarian picture and makes it difficult to fully grasp. As a result, the dilemma persists. On one side is the urgent need to protect civilian lives, and on the other is the political and security stance of regional countries. This tension shows that the issue is not purely humanitarian, but closely tied to long-term strategic calculations. So what do you think is the way out of this dilemma? Expand resettlement or insist on keeping Palestinians in their homeland? Leave your comments below. In the context of many Arab countries refusing permanent resettlement, the burden of support falls on the international community. The central organization is UNRWA, established in 1949, currently assisting more than 5,900,000 Palestinians in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and Gaza. In Gaza alone, the agency operates 140 health centers and nearly 280 schools, with about 290,000 students. However, the annual budget of approximately $1.6 billion to $1.8 billion is often insufficient. In 2023, UNRWA warned of potential cuts to essential services if additional funding is not provided. Regional organizations such as the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have repeatedly called for solidarity, but actual disbursement remains limited. Aid primarily stops at emergency relief rather than sustainable development due to concerns about legitimizing long-term refugee status. Some Western countries have implemented limited humanitarian programs. Canada, Norway, Sweden, and Germany have accepted a few thousand Palestinians, but this number is far too small compared to the millions in need of safe shelter. The United States and the European Union are major donors, but sometimes temporarily suspend contributions due to political reasons directly affecting civilian lives. Egypt and Jordan, two frontline countries, regularly call for burden sharing. Cairo warns that receiving hundreds of thousands more Gaza residents would be a security flashpoint, while Jordan, which has over 2 million Palestinians registered with UNRWA, worries about an overloaded system. Therefore, they emphasize that beyond aid, a political solution is needed to end the cycle of prolonged displacement. Although the international community asserts solidarity, in reality support remains temporary, unstable, and insufficient to meet the enormous needs, prolonging the ongoing dilemma. According to regional analyses, the refusal of many Arab countries to accept Gaza refugees for permanent resettlement stems from a combination of factors. Security concerns, the need to maintain internal stability, historical memories of past crises, diplomatic calculations, legal constraints, and socio-economic costs. Official arguments often emphasize that a sustainable solution must take place within Gaza and the West Bank, rather than creating long-term demographic changes outside the contested area. Conversely, humanitarian organizations and many international observers call for enhanced civilian protection, expanded emergency aid transparency of information, and the search for safer temporary mechanisms. Overall, this is a challenge that is both humanitarian and political. Any approach requires careful consideration of security risks, regional stability, and the legitimate rights of the population. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you find the content useful, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue following us in future analyses. Your support is a great motivation for us to bring even more high-quality information.